And now, from PAX TV Studio 611, your host, Richard Thomas.
Good evening, and welcome to It's a Miracle, and another hour of inspirational true stories. If we've learned anything around here, it's that you can never predict when or where a miracle will happen. And the family in our first story would agree. They found theirs at 1,500 feet in the air. On August 5th, 2000, Henry and Becky Anhalt and their 3 sons boarded a small plane to return home from a church-related trip to the Bahamas. Their pilot was Christopher Pierce, who also owned the Piper Cherokee he was flying.
We met Christopher through our pastor, and he agreed to take us basically with his own time, and he didn't charge us anything except fuel cost.
99er X-ray, you are clear for takeoff on runway 27.
We had basically an uneventful, nice and calm journey. The skies were beautiful. The Caribbean was beautiful.
The plane was heading north over the Florida coast when the pilot quietly slumped forward in his seat, unconscious. Not knowing what else to do, Henry grabbed the controls.
I saw that my husband had the yoke of the plane. And I said, "Why are you flying the plane?" And he looked at me very seriously and he told me, "Christopher's passed out, find some smelling salts." So I looked everywhere. I looked for first aid kits all over the place.
I can't find anything anywhere. What should I do?
What's going through my mind is, you've got to be kidding. This doesn't really happen. This isn't real.
Unfortunately, it was all too real. And unless the pilot regained consciousness, the reality of the situation would soon become deadly.
I was holding him up because he was actually slumping over on Henry, and I began dabbing his face with water and calling out his name.
Wake up, come on, wake up.
I kept saying, "What do we do? I don't know what to do." And I finally told Henry, I said, "You really need to call out on a Mayday."
Mayday! Mayday!
And we called out for about 10 or 15 minutes, just Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
But the air controllers at Tampa International Airport weren't convinced of what they heard.
Did you copy a Mayday? No, I sure didn't, sir. A Mayday, say again?
By now, the plane was flying too low to establish radio contact.
Yeah, it must have been a false alarm.
With no response, the tension inside the plane mounted.
It was a really scary feeling because you feel so alone and you're wondering, what am I going to do with somebody's life that's in your hands? And also at the same time, I was concerned if my husband would know what to do to fly the plane and particularly land the plane. We're totally untrained to, what you do in an airplane.
Mayday!
And I just prayed at that time, "Lord, please let someone hear us."
Is there an aircraft transmitting a Mayday on 11965? This is Hawker 9 Lima Echo.
Her prayers were answered when another plane picked up the SOS and relayed it to ground control.
Affirmative Tampa, there's a single-engine aircraft with passengers talking. The pilot is passed out. Okay, get a position from him if you can, please. If the passenger's familiar with the transponder, have them dial in 0151. Okay, on the single-engine aircraft, there's on your radio stack, there'll be an instrument there's a radio with about 4 digits on it. That's the one. He is not able to change the transponder, 9 Lima Echo.
As Henry tried to adjust the radio, he suddenly noticed that the plane's number 1 fuel tank was nearly empty, and he had no idea how to switch to the reserve tank.
Tampa, this is 9 Lima Echo. He says he believes he's getting low on fuel and wants the instructions on changing tanks. Okay, what type of airplane is he in? Said he's in a Piper.
Through the other pilot, Tampa began feeding Henry instructions on how to change fuel tanks.
99 X-ray. Look for there's a switch on the panel that says fuel pump. Go ahead and turn that on. Then you'll find a selector level that'll say left, right, or both. Turn the pump on and then change tanks.
But when Henry switched the lever, the engine stalled.
Go back to where it was. Have you got power?
Yes.
Okay, just keep it there.
We were really getting very panicky because there really wasn't that much fuel reserve left. Thoughts go through your mind about you don't want to go down the middle of a highway where there's a lot of pedestrians or a lot of people, driving up and down in their cars. Because if you run out of gas, you're basically going down regardless if you're trying to hold it up or not.
Coming up, Henry Anhalt attempts an emergency landing.
When I looked over at my son Jeremiah and Jacob, they were looking at me wide-eyed, and I saw a tear running down my oldest son Jeremiah's face.
The dramatic conclusion when It's a Miracle returns.
When the pilot of a small Piper Cherokee passed out at the wheel, a passenger was forced to take over the controls. But Henry Anhalt had no experience flying or landing a plane. And with the #1 fuel tank nearly empty, it was only a matter of minutes before the plane would go down. Meanwhile, ground control was desperately trying to maintain contact with the aircraft.
Okay, Tampa says if you're sure you know how to change the frequency, they want you to change to 119.90.
And then they quickly changed their mind.
Yeah, hold off on that for just a minute, sir. Okay, 99 X-ray, hold off. Don't change frequency yet. Stand by.
But it was too late. Henry had already switched to another frequency and was now lost to both Tampa and the other pilot.
99 X-ray, this is 9 Lima Echo. 99 X-ray, this is 9 Lima Echo. It's answering Tampa, 9 Lima Echo.
It was a terrifying situation. The Anhalts were once again on their own and at a total loss of what to do. Without radio contact and with their fuel gauge hitting empty, only an experienced pilot would be able to save their lives. But what the Anhalts didn't know was that their pilot was dead.
Have a Mayday. Mayday.
We're circling over Gilbert Field at 2000.
And then, just when all seemed lost, another transmission came over the radio.
This is 739 Romeo Tango. I'm an instructor.
Flight instructor Dan McCullough had overheard the emergency radio exchanges concerning the Piper.
We immediately called Tampa and offered our assistance. At that point, Tampa wasn't turning down anybody that was offering to help.
Okay, 9 Romeo Tango. If you'd like to head towards Winter Haven, apparently the pilot said he's near Winter Haven. He's at 700 feet, 9 Romeo Tango.
Dan quickly changed course and made the short hop to Winter Haven. It wasn't a moment too soon. The Piper was virtually running on fumes. He couldn't see the plane, but he dialed into their frequency and began preparing Henry to change tanks.
Okay, 99 X-ray. You found the fuel selector valve on the left-hand side of the firewall down there by the pilot's leg. It should have an R for right tank, an L for left tank, and an off position. Tell me what position it's currently in.
It's on the right.
Okay, don't turn anything yet. You see the position for left tank.
Yes.
Okay, Piper, go ahead and switch from the R to the L. Keep your hand on the fuel selector the whole time you switch it. If at any point the engine begins to run rough, switch it immediately back to the R. Do you understand?
I was a little nervous while he was trying to make the switch. If you inadvertently turned the fuel selector to the off position, the engine would stop running.
By this time, Henry managed to switch the tanks successfully. Moments later, Dan McCullough had them in his sight.
I was probably about 1,000 feet higher than they were and saw them underneath me.
You and your passengers look out your right-hand side. I'm descending down. I'll be next to you in about 30 seconds.
It was just an awesome sight to see that plane. We were very relieved to have someone there with us.
But their relief was followed by the realization that they still had to land the aircraft.
Okay, just take it nice, slow, and easy. Now, we got to come up with a plan between the two of us. How much time have you got in an airplane?
I hate to say this, but none.
That's all right. Just consider this your first lesson.
I was extremely concerned because it's a difficult situation to be in, never having flown before, to actually have to land the airplane. I indicated to him that what we were going to do was spend a little bit of time flying, and I was going to give him some instruction over the radio so that he could become familiar with how the controls operated in that aircraft.
I need you to follow me right now. What we're going to do is we're going to practice a little bit before I have you try to land, okay?
What I wanted to do was basically like in kindergarten, playing follow the leader, have him follow me around. It's a lot easier to see something else doing it and follow it than to try to do it on your own.
Can you find your airspeed indicator?
Yep.
Okay, what you want to do is you probably don't want that thing to get down below about 70 the way you're flying right now, okay?
He was doing an excellent job of maintaining control of the aircraft, listening to the instructions I was giving him.
You also have to lower the nose. Pitch for airspeed, power for altitude. Remember that.
But Dan knew that the greatest danger still lay ahead.
Follow me. We need to go back toward the airport. Hey, you see that big long runway?
Yep.
That's where you're going to land.
All too soon, the moment of truth had arrived. It was time for Henry to put the Piper down on the ground.
Hey, I want you to follow me right down to the airport. I'm not going to land, but you are, okay?
Absolutely, without a doubt, the most challenging part of any flight is landing an aircraft. The one thing you can never be sure about with somebody that hasn't flown before is how they're going to react when they have to land.
I need you to keep your nose level or slightly above the horizon, okay?
The sight of the ground rushing up to you is scary. I mean, there's no other way to describe it.
At the last minute, Henry's fear got the best of him, and he aborted the landing. But Dan calmly led him around for another try.
Stay right where you are, and I'm going to lead you right back around to the airport. I want you to stay just that far underneath me on the way in, okay?
Oh, we can get there?
You can do it. Is that Chris Pierce's airplane?
Yep.
I thought I knew it well. I've actually got a little time in that airplane, so I know what we're doing. You just follow me, okay?
As Dan chatted casually, he carefully maneuvered his plane behind the Piper.
I'm going to come up a little bit behind you so I can watch you on the way down, and that way I can tell you to pitch the nose up or down on the way in. Does that sound like a plan?
Yep.
You to make a left turn and look for the airport.
I have the airport side, I believe.
Inside the Piper, the family braced themselves for the dangerous descent.
When I looked over at my son Jeremiah and Jacob, they were looking at me wide-eyed, and I saw a tear running down my oldest son Jeremiah's face. You could tell that he was really scared.
I prayed that the pilot would wake back up and he could land, but then it was too late. My dad had to land, and the pilot said, "You ready to land?" And he said, do I have a choice?
I guess I have no choice, do we?
Throttle back just a little bit, then pull the flat bar up.
Okay, pulling flat bar up.
An approach to landing down to 5 feet is something you can talk anybody through. At the point he got 5 feet off the ground, it was kind of time for fate to take over.
It was a very scary feeling to feel the dips. I was so nervous I felt like I was going to pass out.
The aircraft bounced when it hit the ground. My heart skipped a beat a little bit. When it set back down the second time, I knew he had it made.
The Cherokee is down on the runway at Winter Haven. Still right side up, there's no smoke, everybody ought to be okay.
Miraculously, Henry Anhalt had landed the Piper without the slightest damage to its passengers or the plane.
Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. And any landing you can go back to and fly the airplane is a great landing.
Emergency ground personnel moved in to remove the pilot from the plane, only to discover the terrible tragedy that had occurred in the skies. Moments later, the Anhalts, dazed and shaken, slowly emerged from the aircraft onto solid ground.
As I got out of the plane, the realization of what had happened really hit me, and I just began to shake uncontrollably, and I pretty well lost the strength of my legs and kind of fell to the ground.
I went around to the other side of the plane with my wife and kids, and we sat in the grass there for a few minutes and said a prayer, thanking God that He got us on the ground.
But their joy was tempered by the fact that Christopher Pierce had died of a massive heart attack.
The whole experience is really a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, we're so grateful that we're alive and that God has spared our lives. And on the other hand, we're very deeply saddened at the loss of Christopher Pierce, because he was a really great man.
After Dan McCullough had landed his plane, he joined the Anhalts to congratulate Henry.
I can't say enough positive things about the job Henry did in landing that aircraft. It's just unbelievable to me the amount of poise and confidence that he showed in working with me to successfully land that airplane.
In the end, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that what happened that day was miraculous.
We prayed for wisdom, and God sent us a flight instructor. Dan McCullough being there when we needed him, exactly who we needed at the time that we needed him. I just think it's miracle after miracle.
The old-timers at the airport said there's no way I could have landed that plane without divine intervention. And I just give God the glory that He got us on the ground safely.
We wanted to take a moment to remember the man who lost his life in this story, pilot Christopher Warren Pierce. Chris was married, the father of 3 children, and a valued member of his community. He gave generously of his time and resources, regularly flying relief supplies and medical assistance to people in need. He will be sorely missed by everyone who knew him.